Harvest Days are our annual get-together and brings together researchers from across the ASSR, so from 7 different disciplines and 4 departments. Now we decided to focus on our home city. And so this also means that we really speak to our relationship with people in the city, with organizations in the city. And so it was an occasion for us to showcase and also reflect upon the many collaborations we have with stakeholders in Amsterdam.
Thank you to the ISSR for inviting me to give this lecture here. It's an honor and really a luxury to be able to speak with a politician from the city of Amsterdam about my research. What I'm going to do here briefly today is to introduce the topic broadly on which I work on every day. And I will do it as briefly as possible just to give some food for thoughts for our discussion. Now, many of you might have heard the word degrowth or post-growth around. It's circulating widely. But the question is, why are we actually talking about this today at this point, knowing that this word has actually a long history? There are 3 reasons which help us understanding this and also help us understanding why we are so interested about it. First of all, we have more and more scientific evidences that 3 decades of mainstream sustainability politics are not managing to reach their targets, basically decoupling the expansion of the economy from environmental degradation. That's the first reason why today we are interested about this topic. The second is that we have a clear awareness that the global wealth is immense, has reached peaks that never reached before, but it's also very unequally distributed. And this is becoming a public concern. Also in movies, and Hollywood even talks about these things these days. And third, and this is perhaps the most interesting, is that many people, in particular the middle classes, are experiencing a decrease in life quality while an increase of the affluence. And this is the cost of living crisis. Now, working classes have experienced this for years, but when the middle classes experience that, politics start to talk about these issues, okay? Now, let me give you a few evidences of this. This image shows you globally the relation between GDP growth, economic growth globally, and the CO2 emissions and the material footprint. You can see here that there is what economists call the relative decoupling, a slowdown of CO2 emission relative to GDP growth. But what is more interesting from the point of view of urban or circular economy studies is that the material footprint, all the stuff we extract and dig out of the land to make anything from my jacket to the buildings in which we live, is not decreasing at all. So this has no impact whatsoever, let alone that the Paris targets are actually already out of reach. However, degrowth tells a different story than that. It says that the reasons why this is happening is not equally distributed among social classes. The issue is that we have a disproportionate inequality between those social groups that have a very large responsibility in emissions and environmental destruction, and a large amount of people who actually don't. So Oxfam research, very known, shows that 10%, the 10% top incomes of the world consume or emit 60% of all emissions. This is obviously the global north, the affluent countries, but the story is not only this. It's also that within particular world region, we have this class disparities. You can see in this image briefly that in the EU, for example, the top 10% incomes are responsible for about 5 times more than the 50 of the bottom 50% incomes. In the Netherlands as well, we have a clear inequality of wealth distribution. And also in other countries, like in the Middle East, North African countries, we have this extreme inequality between particular social groups that emit much, much more than the poorer social groups. Okay, so any politics of sustainability need to address this inequality. Together with a few colleagues from this department, but also other universities, we try to look at the same within the housing market. This was just a scope study within the housing market of the Netherlands. And there we discovered that the 3 decades of mainstream sustainability measures in the housing energy efficiency field have created a paradoxical situation where we find ourselves in a situation in which the top incomes have paradoxically the same emissions of the bottom incomes. And that is for very different reasons, obviously. Top incomes have made efficiency measures in their housing, but they still consume more, obviously. They have larger houses, they use more the cars, while the bottom incomes are cramped into poorly insulated social housing, which has seen major divestments in the last years. One last evidence on the basis of which degrowth has become a debate is the fact that there is also a non-linear relation between increase in economic wealth and increase in life satisfaction. These studies are a bit general, but they show you that, for example, after a certain degree of affluence, life satisfaction tends to flatten. So you can be very rich, but not happier than somebody who is not as rich as well. Also, economists have shown that if we take into consideration the human and environmental costs of this economic wealth, and look at this cost and deduct them from this economic wealth, overall progress in society has actually stagnated already since the late 70s, because we're actually having an unsustainable form of wealth creation, humanly and naturally. So in fact, when politicians, I would say, or scientists as well, they say talk about green growth, so more growth but turn green, it's because they want to avoid the problem of social inequality. That's pretty clear to me. Now, few definitions, because I know there is a lot of confusion on these things. What are these terms meaning? First of all, when we use the term green growth, and here we had the minister of green growth, so it's good to explain, we mean an approach to a development that basically equates increasing living standards with an increase in economic wealth, and believes that this economic wealth can be made sustainable using technology. Also, housing efficiency is a technology. It's an eco-modern approach. For post-growth, and this is an emerging discourse within many disciplines, we basically assume that this equation is not true. And post-growth studies of many kinds basically argue we should exclusively and primarily focus on well-being in order to address also environmental issues. Now, degrowth is obviously a post-growth perspective, but it's much more clear on the fact that in order to do post-growth, we need to actively reduce excess wealth, and in particular excess production and consumption. And to do that, we need to undo or tackle fundamentally capitalist relations of production and consumption. Okay, so that's a very important statement. It's an anti-capitalist state. This degrowth positions has two fundamental arguments, which are basically social and ecological together, and helps also research to focus on these two issues at the same time. First of all, it's about indeed increasing all those activities that are fundamental to satisfy essential human needs, also regenerate the environment, starting from those economies of care, health, well-being, which basically have a low footprint but a high social value. The university is one of those economies, by the way. However, in order to create the environmental space for this, obviously degrowth is very clear on the planned, here I stress planned, reduction of consumption and production, particularly in excess, in the case of excess sectors. And one of these excess sectors that is usually mentioned is private aviation, or like frequent aviation. That's one of the clear type of examples that are given. It's basically a politics of more for many and less for the few. It's quite a statement, but to me it seems like fair. So why do I research degrowth in the field of urban studies? That's my expertise. It's because cities can be understood from this perspective in two ways. First of all, urban areas are infrastructures of circulation, globally of capital, knowledge, and matter. This image shows you one of the many logistic centers just at the periphery of Amsterdam. This one was built in the Luxembourg polder. You know the place. Now, looking at cities, we know, for example, that only 600 cities in the world basically collect 2/3 of the all global GDP. So we have this concentration of wealth and circulation of wealth in urban environment. However, cities are also what David Harvey calls consumption funds. And here it means two things. Obviously, there are places where wealth gets fixed into real estate, rents, costs of electricity, living, etc., but also a place where the culture of consumption necessary for capitalism to survive is created and reproduced. Okay, these are also areas where we actually learn to be not only citizens, but also consumers. That's why I think it's interesting to see to look at urban areas from this perspective. Now, if we use the green growth critique or the degrowth critique to green growth in looking at urban areas, we can already understand many pitfalls of mainstream sustainability policies. First of all, the fact that policies like electrification or sustainable mobility, yes, may reduce CO2 emissions within the boundary of the municipality, but eventually tend to increase the environmental footprint of the city as a whole. They need to take land to extract materials to build the electric infrastructure that we need for this. The second process is related to that is that this focus on the city and the cost on the hinterland creates also the clear anti-urban, anti-green backlashes. In fact, what we see today as an anti-urban backlash is the product of this, I think, a mainstream limited sustainability approach to urban environments. And finally, we have internal production of differences when we look at processes of low carbon gentrification, increasing rent prices due to green investments targeted to areas where rent caps are very high and can be maximized. So these are all problems that come to the light when we use this lens to understand sustainability politics in urban environments. Amsterdam is a very clear example of this. It's an extremely successful city in terms of economic performance. Employment is rising, jobs are increasing. However, it's performing extremely bad in terms of social indicators. You don't need to look at the right image. This is the source of the left image. This is the so-called Brede Velvaart monitor. The city monitors the performance of different indicators, economic, social, environmental. And this image on the left, which was made by the city itself, showed that, in fact, the only two indicators that are improving are employment and overweight. Now, how did we reach that point? I have many explanations. A lot of my research revolves on explaining this situation. But, we can also take some extreme examples. These two examples are examples where, indeed, the wish of public government to stimulate economic growth in order to generate jobs and public returns has delivered infrastructure that are not delivering the goals achieved. The South Axis, the once major flagship urban development project, 5 billion euros invested, is actually the infrastructure of the financial industry in the city. They move here a lot of billions of euros, move them out, and many of those euros don't trickle down to the environment where this infrastructure is related. But also the airport is an example. We know in Europe 30% of the users, 20% of all the users make 60% of all the flights. That's known, and in some cases it's even worse. In Amsterdam, I think about 60% of the flights are just connecting flights. So we have all infrastructure. It is extremely environmentally destructive. It is basically serving this idea of growth, but actually, in terms of collective social well-being, we can discuss a lot. Let's put it this way. Now, I am often asked to give an idea of what a degrowth-informed urban agenda would look like. And there is a lot of discussion there, and this perhaps something we can discuss today. But just to give you a few of the suggestions that circulate in the literature. First of all, the importance is of providing minimum service guaranteed at all levels of the city and national scale as well, of course. This can be funded with wealth taxes and caps. These are a very common tool to fund these things. The phasing out of major fossil fuel infrastructure needs to come with politics that redistribute, in fact, jobs, space, and funds to the economies of care, health, well-being, and ecological regeneration. These are the keywords. And obviously, and the level of the city, the disincentivizing of underuse of space or excess consumption of space can be also a way to achieve or stimulate a degrowth informed agenda. More and more authors are claiming that the institutional approach to achieve this would look like something called a public common partnership, a way basically to govern the built environment where the role of the state is revitalized next to the bottom-up, let's say, initiative of different practices of urban commoning. And this project is in Amsterdam East. I contributed to make it possible. It's a housing co-op, and it's just open, so visit, and it's I can tell you more how this works. It's really a science park. Now, in terms of research, just to conclude, my team is working on this issue from different angles. This is just an introduction. We look, first of all, at the political ecology of green capitalism. So we look at production, labor, and industries in producing the green infrastructure of urban sustainability. Some research do that. We have research looking at the culture of consumerism that sustain economic growth. Obviously, we're looking at the spaces of care or the economy of care in the city, starting from housing. And obviously, as a planner, we are also interested in the issue of political strategy to actually make this type of agendas gaining public traction. Let's say that's the type of research we do on the mobilization level. And I do this with a nice list of wonderful people. They're listed here. It's not a huge team, but they are really great. And thank you for listening.
Wow, that is just a brief overview of the work you do.
Yes.
And only brief, but there's a world behind it, of course. And let me just state that I'm very happy to be here. And thank you so much for the invitation. And we, as a city of Amsterdam, are so happy that we are also a constant case study and also maybe a laboratory for your the social science work that you do. And we are only always very happy that we can work together so closely with the UvA. Also within the city center of Amsterdam, we work as well, for example, how we would see the city center as as a place where people feel at home instead of only as magnet for tourists and visitors. But let's just, if we go to your work, one of the things you mentioned was the new main co-op that you helped plan. I think this is one of the examples in small that we actually see that how housing changes if the user and the owner is both in the same hands. And so what exactly did you do with the main co-op?
Yeah, of course. First of all, I would like to say that in Amsterdam now there are about 13 cooperatives that are growing housing co-ops that are, let's say, starting up, and it's covering almost about 1,000 people. So it's a lot of people involved in this. Another thing I would like to say is that when we look at the cooperative, we should not over-celebrate it. When the cooperative sector works, when there is a very strong public sector as well. So the public partnership translated into the housing system would look like affordable social housing guaranteed, and then experiment in housing co-ops for groups that have shared values and they want to realize them in a built environment. What did I do at the New Mint? It lasted 6 years. We together applied for a tender for land made available by the city. It was the second project in the city next to De Warren, which is in Eiburg, Centrum Island. And we proposed a vision of an inclusive and diverse housing. And we made an institutional infrastructure for managing this co-op. And obviously we had different setbacks, mostly financial, due to the lack of funding. In fact, if I would say pinpoint one of the causes that makes this cooperative struggle is in the difficult access to credit. As you probably know, Rabobank is the only one that today gives credit to these co-ops. But they don't exist without the municipality giving them land at affordable hairpack prices.
Yes, and I was also, as a city councillor, I was involved with the helping the main co-op of the Nieuwe Meent with their funding, or they also turn to us, of course. And I'm very happy that they've now finally realized it. And I think this is a very good example what we can do, for example, and make land available, because this is one of the policies, of course, that we have to do for a different type of ownership and a different type of use of housing. But in terms of degrowth and also urban planning, it's of course, there are so many different strategies and programs involved. Do you think we should do it step by step, or how would you see the process in this change?
So yeah, it's a good question. I will also follow up with a question. Lamis. About this. First of all, when we look at how this new political idea gain public support, it's never, a process that comes from the institutional politics, but it's a cooperation between social movements, prefigurative practices, grassroots organizations that are already active in the territory, and that together with some progressive political parties make a new narrative. Now, the degrowth narrative, it's not a social democratic traditional narrative. That's clear. It's about also undoing certain type of things and taking a clear stance against particular types of urban consumption and economies that are considered as very bad. So this is an important step that is also characterizing a lot of the degrowth affiliated movement in relation to mainstream social democracy, okay? So my question to you would be, how would you see, as a Stadtteilzentrum, I'm sure you are very concerned with, for example, the ship industry of cruises, right? And there is a big debate there about this industry. So I wonder, how do you see this industry that we know is not bringing large social value? It's very extractivist of the, built environment in which this shit stop, and it's very environmentally dangerous. So how would you relate yourself to this industry?
You mean specifically the cruise terminal, with the cruise terminal, of course, yeah. Well, this, as you probably know, that the municipality of Amsterdam would really like the port of the cruise terminal to be moved. In 2018, after the elections, we also stated we're going to move the cruise terminal as soon as possible. Unfortunately, that has not happened yet, and we are working hard on it, because especially for cruise tourism, for example, is really a few hours visit to a city. It's really a quick way of experiencing a city, and well, as you stated, it extracts more from the city that it actually contributes. So we are very much looking at changing the way visitors experience Amsterdam city center. And of course, we also have to look at safety issues, at waste issues, and the costs for the municipality or the cost for the community to actually facilitate this type of visitors. So from the general perspective and the perspective of the community, it would be so much better if we could change this type of visitors and this type of tourism. And this is one of the things, of course, it all starts with the knowledge, and also with the idea that it's a broad idea that some ways of some economies do not contribute to the welfare or the well-being of our people or the city. But it's also really hard to actually explain this to the broad public. But I think people already made a start, for example, in our policy on how we see public space. Amsterdam maakt ruimte, Amsterdam makes space. We say the public space is not just a mode of transport or a place where you just pass through. It should be the living room for people who live in Amsterdam. And you already showed the brede welvaartsscan, the broad welfare scan, so you will. And this is actually a start to let everyone get used to the idea that we have to look at in another way to our economy and also in the way we live together.
No, thank you. I mean, you mentioned the brede welvaart. Let's organically move to this. I mean, these tools are very useful for an analysis of giving a picture of the state of the society economy in a particular territory, right? It can be Amsterdam, it can be the Netherlands. And, the donut economics framework was used before, it was similar, they were just mapping. But for example, in the case of the donut and the mapping, the results of those type of analysis was that we needed to exclude some type of industries that were not within the boundary of the city, but were functional to the city, namely the airport and the harbor in particular. But the airport particularly, because the airport is owned by the city of Amsterdam, but it's not within the municipality of Amsterdam. And the city of Amsterdam is basically a shareholder of the company, and also shareholder of the sub-companies that develop land for the airport industry. So these tools don't help much in acting, right? They give you a map that then you can change or ignore. So in fact, I wonder how you as a politician relate to these tools, because they can say many things in different ways, right? You can also abuse these tools somehow. It's very difficult to.
Well, let me just say something as a progressive politician, which is something else than just only being on the board of city center. But as a politician, I think we need these tools, and also your research, and we need to set the agenda constantly and also point out how urgent it is. And of course, for Schiphol, for example, I'm very proud of our wethouder Van Buren, who actually used that small share that we have, the participation in Schiphol, to be an activist participant, had to make activist statements that Schiphol should not continue her agenda of increase, but that you actually should go to decrease. And it took us a long while, for example, in the municipal council, to get this far. So this is the start. This is where we start with the change and where we can change. And things like the Donut Coalition and really help us to substantiate this type of action for the municipality. And then secondly, I think what we should do is always set the agenda, but also just point out which industries do not have for the social well-being of people. For example, like the data center. A few years ago, it was still normal that data centers are still built around Amsterdam. And now we've stated, no, we cannot facilitate any data centers anymore, which of course is a no-brainer if you look at the enormous impact they have and how much energy they need. That these can start with these actions.
I mean, one of the interesting things I always talk about with politicians from different levels of skill is that, in fact, often the conclusion of our conversation is that local governments cannot do that much after all, right? Even though I disagree partially, but this is the conclusion, because indeed these major infrastructures, taxation frameworks, at least in the Netherlands, are very much regulated at higher scales. Obviously, the livestock farming, so the management of water systems, this is all stuff that can be beyond the municipal politics. So I wonder how do you as an urban politician, how do you input your progressive agenda to these higher levels of scale without losing what seems to be a radical edge? We don't want cruise ship, we don't want the airport, right? Mm-hmm. We want shrinking these things. Mm-hmm. But this is not what we hear at the higher level. So how does it work? Also within your party, I would say. How does it work?
Well, politics is, of course, a very complex matter, because it's not only what we will or what we want or what we can do, but I always feel that politics is something that we do with the people and together with the people. So it's also very much how we can change behavior, or how you can change tendency in society, and you do it together with society. That's what I like the most about politics, of course. And as the city of Amsterdam, we tend to be a quite left city within a very right country. Let's face it, the Netherlands is still a very right country. And this Well, as I think we really have the duty to show how it can be done differently, and that's how we do it. Like in constant practice, we show in Amsterdam that you actually can strive for a different society, and that's what we show with the Donut Coalition or with shrinking or a plea for shrinking of Schiphol. And in the same time, we work together with other cities in Europe and in the Netherlands, and also, of course, in the Dutch Parliament. We constantly, and also in opposition, we constantly show and tell them it can be done differently. And well, let's just change the laws and the lawmaking. And I hope we will be able to do that as well with the new cabinets and the new government. And we will always keep them on the progressive side.
That's a very nice closing comment. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for the lecture.